Hi, this is Bruce, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to send and receive messages. This tutorial is largely a repetition of video tutorials 1, 2, and 3, where we fetched a list of users, logged in a user, and signed up new users. To list the users, we used fetch to get JSON data from the PHP using a database query, and then we used for each loops and create element to append users to our list. To log in, we passed some form data, the email and password, in the fetch request, stored the login ID and username in local storage, and the database query included a password verify function using bcrypt encryption for security. To sign up, we once again passed form data, full name and username along with email and password, to the database query and inserted the form information in the users table. In this video, we will send messages using fetch, inserting them in the database along with the ID of the sender and receiver, and we'll list the messages using fetch, querying the database using a union statement to get messages both sent and received to and from the users. Let's get started. You can see I've got the messages file open, and so far we've got a list of the different users in our messages. If we take a look at the listusers.php, I've changed the database query so that we're filtering out the user who's logged in. So you can see here we're getting the user ID, username, and color from the marmalade users table, where the user ID is not equal to, and then we'll pass in the user ID of the user who's signed in. So in messages, let's look at how we can pass that user ID. So we've got our users section here. Let's take this and we'll put this up at the top. And then we're going to create some form data. So we'll call it user data and make that equal to new form data, even though we're not going to use an actual form. And then we're going to let from equal the ID of the user who's logged in, so the from user, that is stored in local storage. So we're going to use a get item, and let's just go double check. And let me just log in here. And so you can see I've used from user ID with a capital U and capital ID. So that we're going to get item from user ID. And then we're going to append that to our form data, so the user data, and the key is from user, and the value is the user ID that we're picking up from local storage. So then in our fetch, we need to pass in some headers. So into the body of our headers, we're going to pass the user data, and we'll specify the method as post. And now if we refresh on our messages page, we should see that what we don't get is the user that signed in. So I'm signed in under Bruno, and Bruno no longer appears in the list of users with whom I can chat, which is exactly what we want. So the next thing is to create a form that we can use to send messages. So let's add that section. And we'll call the form message form. And in that we'll put a label and a text area. And we'll name the message, and we'll name the text area message, and we'll also give it an ID of message, and we'll set a placeholder to message. And we can get rid of the columns and rows here. We'll do that with CSS later. And we'll upload that. And there you can see we've got it. Let's add a little break at the end here and another little break here. And another little break here. And then let's create an input submit button. And we'll give it a name of message button just in case we need to grab it later. And there we can type in our message, and eventually we'll be able to send that message. So now let's go back to our messages.js. And essentially this is going to be something like the sign up. So let's copy this. And paste it. Sorry, the name of the form is message form. We've got a query selector that's selecting the message form, then we're adding the submit event listener, and when we do that, we want to send the message. And then we'll change the PHP to send message. What we also want to do when we're sending the message is send along two pieces of information. So one is the from user ID and two is the to user ID. So we're going to do form data, append, and we want the from user, and we'll make that equal to local storage, get item, from user ID, just like we did above. So now let's go back and we will make sure that we can get the to user ID when we select a user. You can see here from the previous video, we created a function to display the users, and in that function we added an event listener so that when the user that was signed in clicked on another user, it would call the select user function. And for right now, we're just taking that user that we've selected and putting it into the console. So what we want to do is store that user into the local storage. So let's go back to login, and we're going to do set item, and we want to set the to user ID based on the to user ID, which is a data attribute that we've assigned to each user. So you can see here in our list of users, we've got the data attribute to user ID with the user IDs that are taken from the database. So now that we've got that, we should be able to append the to user by getting the to-user ID from local storage. And then if we look at our send message, you can see here we've got a from user and a to user. So we're getting from user and to user from the request. So from user and to user that we've appended to the form data. And then the query is to insert into the Marmalade messages table the from user, the to user, and the message that the user's typed up. And we'll just double check our application. So if we click on Johnny, we can see now that we've got a to user ID. If we come in here into the messages, sign up user is not defined on 151. On 51. So the event listener is the send message. So here in the event listener on submit, the function I called send message, but I forgot to update the function from here. So we've updated that now. And if we hit send, you can see that it says that it's inserted. And if we go to the messages table and select the data, you can see that we have indeed inserted that message into the table. So now that we know that we can send messages, the next challenge will be to see if we can read the messages between two users.